you so much. We're excited to host you for the Lessons Learned Successes Lead with our Pupil Premium panel. I'm going to ask Kerry, would you like to introduce yourself first to our colleagues who are with us this evening?
Yeah, I'm Kerry Ollett. I'm School Improvement Advisor for Esteem Mat. We're a trust who are mostly special schools and AP, and a real range of need within our special, sort of from sort of PMLD pupils right up to more able ASD, so covering the full range.
Yeah. And that's a real important, so this personal thank you from me for bringing expertise to them today. We find that colleagues from a range of different settings do struggle with the genericness of sometimes that strategy document, and making some meaningful integrations because of the comorbidity of both being disadvantaged and having a presentation of special educational needs. How do we clarify our thinking? So a big thank you for being with us. The lovely Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah, I'm Rachel Pritchard. I'm Deputy Director of the Essex Research School. I'm also head teacher of a primary in Essex. We're 563 children, and our pupil premium numbers are actually lower than the average. We're 14%. So hopefully tonight I can give a bit of a perspective from if you're a school where perhaps your funding isn't that huge, but how we can still make an impact.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, particularly at quite a large primary school with over 500 pupils, and managing change at that scale, the number of staff, and as you said, with a smaller financial envelope that comes with, a real challenge for leaders. Thank you so much for being with us. And we also have Michelle. Thank you, Michelle, for being with us.
Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Gorton. I'm Senior Vice Principal at Wyndham Academy. We're based in Derby. And we've got just under 500 children and just under 40% pupil premium. So part of my role is around leading pupil premium across the school. I've done that for around 5 years, but also hand in hand with that quality of education. So a large part of my role is looking at how we can use the evidence base to really drive our quality of education, but considering really how we can impact all of our pupils, but in particular our most disadvantaged pupils, through that lens as well.
Very much that co-alignment between a whole school strategy and with such large numbers of pupil premium with that PP strategy and making sure that intertwinement, and that's a golden thread for all of our strategies. So such a wealth that the panel brings tonight. So colleagues, the way the session is going to be structured, I'm going to be using a little bit of signposting. We're assuming that some of the colleagues on the call tonight will be those who are remaining curious about their roles, potentially those new to post, those who are newer in their position, or somebody who's really wanting to look outwards and think how they continue to improve. So we're going to be signposting some high quality resources and some support tools, and then casting a question to the panel to share. And I've already pre-warned them that anyone who's smiling and nodding, I'll go, oh, you're obviously very engaged in this question. Would you like to answer first? So we're going to see who smiles and nods during the first part. Okay, colleagues, let's get cracked on then. So obviously we here in our remit as the Derby Research School, and we are very much the advocates of being evidence informed and allowing ourselves to be empowered by the evidence base, the best bets that are out there. And we like to be able to signpost really high ticket items, big win items that can help us in our roles. So we're coming from the base of supporting access to that already curated evidence base. So the EEF's suite of tools on the guide to the Pupil Premium is actually referenced in the DfE documentation. So if you've not had a chance to dig into that, obviously it talks about that tiered approach, which is linked to that menu of approaches in the strategy document. So the BEF guide to the Pupil Premium is a really nice light read with some deep concepts in there. So it's a very accessible read, but allows us to really interact with core themes that we think from the evidence base are most pertinent. And alongside that, if you are looking at the menu of approaches, there's a little support tool, a discussion prompt for governors and trustees, very useful tool for governors to support in their role, and the menu of approaches sort of posted there. So those are kind of the key documentation, and they sit alongside the DFE's guidance. If you're new, and I'm mindful I have colleagues who are new here today, if you're new to Leading Pupil Premium, this is the kind of statutory holy grail. This is the thing that you're going to point yourself towards to make sure that you have exactly the statutory information that you need. And in there, you've got the lovely Using Pupil Premium guidance for school leaders, and we'll be referring to that, and we'll be bouncing back and forth between these two documents, both the statutory requirements, because we still have to make sure that that funding spend is met in terms of the funding rules, but also we want to come back to maximum impact. So we're going to bounce between those two documents, alongside the beautiful templates that are available. My top tip to make your life easier is when you go onto it, scroll down to the bottom and see where it says last updated, where it says unhide the updates, and it will tell you when an update was made and what was updated. So if you're a Pupil Premium lead and you last checked it after the December change and you then come back to it again, you don't have to read everything to know which parts were changed, and it gives you a quick win. And trust me, your time is so valuable. Little quick wins like that will make a difference. So coming to the structure, we all know that the DFE guidance tells us that we need to follow a simple flow process around that kind of logical chain of work as leaders. Obviously, starting with our pupils, starting with identifying the challenges faced by those pupils, using evidence to both explore and consider the effect in which what we're doing already has, and how we can continuously improve, develop the effective strategy, and then going into deliver and monitor and evaluate and sustain. What's really, really interesting, if I can just pause there for a second, is it used to be for number 2, using evidence to support your strategy. Now it's just using evidence, because actually your evidence might challenge the strategy that you have currently in place. And it might make you think about the biggest levers for change. It's about using strategy to critically evaluate, using evidence to critically evaluate over actually just using evidence to validate what you have. The other change since last year, if you were a PP lead from last year now, is it used to be implement your strategy, and they've expanded it out in light of the new guidance report for implementation. The first step is deliver and monitor, and being really deliberate about that first sequence, and then evaluate and sustain. And I think that's a clever choice of wording to be really explicit at the stage of implementation that 4 and 5 is situated against. So there's some little changes in language from the DFE that I thought would be worth pointing out. So with that, the first area that we're asked to account for on the form is about identifying the challenges faced by schools' disadvantaged pupils. And we're going to look at a few pointers around that, and we're going to cast a question to our panel. It's situated in this very familiar part of the form that we have, saying around 5 we're asked to identify. You could add more, you could have slightly less, just being really contextual. But please do remember, if we've got too many priorities, we've got no priorities at all. So really think about those that are the biggest levers. And this is where I really look back to Mark Rowland's work. And if you are new to the Pupil Premium leadership role, this is an incredibly accessible text. It's like a little mini handbook. He goes into lots of really good themes, but he also goes into a Pupil Premium review framework, which I think is really useful as a reflective tool. What I love about it is under recommendation tool, where he talks about that robust assessment of pupil, which is all about that identifying challenges part. He talks about secure a clear understanding of the impact of disadvantage on learning. So we really want to think about challenges and barriers that our pupils are experiencing that come into the classroom and come into our school, that really presents a stopping point for them to actively engage in challenge and learning, that stops them from thriving in our curriculum and in our schools. And I think that's a really important question to explore. And with that, then, the guidance document, this will be very familiar for those who are reading. They talk about using diagnostic assessment, really getting under the bonnet of our data. And it obviously encourages us to use a range of data to include non-academic challenges as well. So attendance, persistent absence, behaviour incidences and exclusions, wellbeing, mental health and safeguarding. And to really get under the bonnet. What is new this new addition to it, and trust me, I am that geek, when they republish it, I do go through the tooth comb, left, right, looking at both documents. Yes, official geekdom. But what I thought was interesting this year is it talks about when identifying the main challenges people are facing, it is important to consider the underlying academic and non-academic causes of them. Go under the tip of that iceberg, go back down to the root causes. So we're not just looking at the superficial tip of the iceberg, the superficial picture, but we're going back to, and so where is disadvantage representing a barrier to them? So for example, low attainment is not a barrier, it is an output, it's what we see at the end of it. So underneath that, it might be poor early language development, and that's our root cause we want to address. So that's that first step that we have. So our first question to the panel now would be thinking about that, identifying challenges for RED. As Pupil Premium leaders, how do you approach this in your setting? And we know there's an importance of kind of triangulating that data. What helps you the most to identify a key number of challenges? And with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to invite Kerry, would you like to share your thoughts first? And what works for you?
Yeah, and I think this is something we've really looked at as a trust, and really making sure sort of the challenges are evidence-based, and not just making sweeping statements, but where are we finding the evidence for the challenges? Because with the essence of our children, it's really complex, so the challenges, and really some of it's really deep-rooted. Attendance is obviously quite an issue within special schools and AP. You know, AP is, 41% attendance, so actually you're taking that into consideration. And obviously got quite complex behaviour problems for a lot of our pupils, which can be a significant barrier. So really digging into our behaviour data. So, not just looking at behaviour, but then really digging deep into the behaviour data to find out sort of where that is. Working really closely with our pastoral teams, I think, is really important at this level for us as well. Looking at challenges, because a lot of ours, families really have challenging times supporting and living with sort of complex behaviours and complex needs, and that has a massive impact on them. So some of our really sort of core deep information actually comes not from data, but from sort of the conversations with pastoral teams and conversations with teachers around sort of the struggles and the complexities of families. And because of that, then we've got lots of agencies involved with our children, lots of cross-agency collaboration, which again makes it really complex. And sort of advocating for our families, whether they're getting is some of the barriers and some of the challenges because they're not actually getting the requirements that they need and the agencies that they need to support them. So those are sort of really digging deep into, not going beyond sort of the data, really digging deep into the barriers for our families, but actually making sure that we're able to say where we're getting that evidence from, and not just, oh, they don't get out much because they've not got much cultural capital, so we need to take them out more. Well, how do you know? Where's that information coming from? What's the information from our families? What are the challenges of getting them out in the community? That can be around behaviours, it can be around safety, it can be around access. So again, really digging into that.
Yeah, I thought it was really nice that you talked about that family, because sometimes we can think it is the child who is disadvantaged, and we forget actually the whole family, by virtue of whatever that label definition that the government gives us, the whole family is disadvantaged, and we need to kind of be an advocate for that family and be on their side and really ask those curious questions with them to unpick that. I really like that. And you talked a lot about using soft data, which can sound a bit anecdotal, but actually beyond valuable from the experts we work with. So thank you so much for sharing. Michelle, would you like to add anything to Kerry's experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as we've kind of already said, I think just it's so important to ensure challenges again from a range of different stakeholders across the school community. So when we're identifying them, kind of at Wyndham, what we do is come and hold like a workshop style approach with a range of leaders from across school. And different stakeholders who can input into that. So we might look at the data. So for example, we've looked and said kind of like writing is an area for development, but then like you've already said, actually looking at that root cause, well, what specifically in writing is it? that is holding our children back. And from that, sort of recently, we've really been looking into that physical development side as one of those kind of root causes. So actually, what can we do from that? But equally speaking to kind of teachers, TAs, what's their kind of like lived experience with that, alongside kind of parents as well. So really digging deep into that data, but speaking to kind of people who can really dig beneath it rather than just that surface level, what we can see. Has been really important. And again, kind of making sure that we're looking at that non-academic side as well. So speaking to our attendance lead, who knows our family so well and can give us that background information, and kind of pastoral leads as well. But yeah, really kind of drilling down into that cause of the challenge has been really beneficial to us in ensuring that we can sustain that progress over time, and really make use of our sort of pupil premium strategy and funding across school as well.
Yeah, what really struck me there, you were talking about the specificity of like going to the root cause, and it's much like going to a doctor. If they're just looking at the kind of symptoms but not thinking about the cause of it, then we wouldn't want to be taking misprescribed tablets, would we? And it's the same aspect for us around really wanting to address, because these needs need to be met. So that was a really striking part around as well your workshop with stakeholders. Really interesting. Rachel, how would you add to that? What would you reflect from your context?
I think one of the things we do as well is we collect data around all of the, as you said, is so key, I think, Harry, the soft data as well. But we look at things like what clubs do they attend as well? Do they attend clubs, etc.? So we extend some of their academic data as well and go beyond that. Do their parents attend parents' evenings, and all of these things, so that we get a very broad picture around the children. And that's helped us, so that we've really looked at then any pupil premium child that doesn't go to a club, we've really actively asked them what club they would like, and if we haven't got that club, we've tried to extend and get those things to get them in. Because I think one of the things that's really struck me about the challenges, they are challenges, but we've worked really hard at attendance with ours, and although it's below all our other children, it is equal to national. And I think there's a danger that you almost think, oh, we've got that now, so that doesn't need to be a challenge on our strategy. But actually, I think it's because of all the proactive things of the feeling of that we are making school inclusive for them, it works. And I think there's a day after thinking that we're coming up to that reviewing and the changing that as we've all got to in December, that there's a danger that you think, oh, that's almost done now, and I go on to one. So that's another thought for me, that it's sometimes acknowledging where you're meeting the challenge, but that doesn't mean you should stop doing those. They may not be initial ones that you then do, but actually there still needs to be that sort of keeping it going.
Yeah, and I suppose you're talking about that lived experience drive around that lived experience around clubs, friendship groups, the family comfort in being able to approach the school and connect with the school. Those are all factors of that child's life, that people's life, that we really need to build a picture of. Going back to Mark's comment, what does social disadvantage look like in the classroom? That's really
yeah, sorry, one of the things just really struck me as crucial, that we've really looked at early years, and we felt the importance of reading, and we actually get our early years, the first thing they do as an assessment when the children come in is we talk to the children about, do they have a favorite book, can they even talk about books really, and we ask them if they have bedtime stories, and we found over the years that's reduced. It's not just our disadvantaged children that don't have stories. So again, it's thinking about that capital, that we know they've got to read. They need to associate reading with something that's fun and pleasurable if they're going to do this really hard thing of learning to read. So that's one of the first bits of data that we collect, that we then know we can start to address.
That's really interesting, that longitudinal part over time, which I think as well, that's what the kind of guidance in terms of the strategy statement, not just looking at it in 1 year, but looking over multiple years, if you see patterns over time. And for our colleagues who are in a much smaller schools from Derbyshire, for example, or Nottinghamshire, and potentially only mixed age groups and things like that, you can interpret your data over a 3-year window, looking at bigger trends. That tends to be an easy way to articulate. And we are aware that there will be colleagues from those contexts where if you've only got a couple of pupils who are pupil premium, or a handful of pupils, it's very hard to see kind of like a correlation in a year group. So you need to look at overtimeness. So thank you so much, Rachel, for exploring those themes with us. And hopefully we've got a nice starting point, a range of recommendations for colleagues to take away. Looking then at the next element, then the second one we've touched on already is upon using evidence. So within that, the lovely DfE statutory guidance introduces us to the menu of approaches, which aligns very much with the tiered approach. The menu of approaches does have an element to it where it says the conditions of grant, so either payment grant from the Pupil Premium, require schools to spend their Pupil Premium in line with the menu. So it asks us to consider a range of external evidence alongside your knowledge of your pupils. So it is still coming back to what you know works for you and your contacts, as well as that wider evidence base. And this is where we start to ensure that we marry both together. External evidence can help you better understand which specific activities have been found to be the most effective, what implementation strategies will be important, and the relative impact of different approaches, i.e. we're doing something, but there might be something else out there that's a bigger lever for change. So if we put our energy into that, that will potentially give us bigger dividends if implemented well. Or it invites us to think maybe we're doing too many things and we need to narrow down the focus to do the biggest, to approach the best bets and biggest levers. What I would sort of point out at this point, yes, we have 3 tiers, the high quality teaching, the targeted academic support and wider strategies. It does offer some suggestions of approaches you could implement, which is very useful to hold up a mirror and think, to what extent are we maximising some of these approaches, some of these activities? What is very noteworthy, apologies, to mention, is it does say in the guidance, schools may be justified in funding items not listed, that's often a question I get asked, where this is necessary to overcome specific barriers to pupil attainment. For example, to meet acute needs around pupil equipment to ensure readiness to learn. So one of these, it was an interesting conversation I had with a colleague that was in a SEND specialist school with pupils that had that needed specific equipment, the physical support equipment, and they were saying, well, it doesn't come under the 3 tiers, and I signposted them back. That would be a very, very good example of deploying Pupil Premium funding to meet an acute need, and that's really, really, you know, a really obvious example. And we would still come back to, and within your whole school strategy, maybe without a cost to it, where are you looking at your high quality teaching, where and looking at some of the levers that maybe come with less of a cost that would still help you work towards those goals. So we come back to, yes, the tiered approach is important, but just signposting that opportunity, because it is a question we get asked regularly. The way that it looks on the form is it breaks it down into the activity area, the evidence that supports the approach, and you're linking back to the challenges you just identified. And I'm just going to say challenge numbers. Some things are substantial levers for impact that they might affect a number of challenges. They might address 3 out of your 5 challenges and start to look at that. And that's where we want to be putting our biggest effort behind to really get that right and get those benefits of that potential impact, because they have a big effect size for us, or in terms of a big impact over a number of areas. So I'm just signposting that little tip there about thinking about, well, do we have the biggest levers for change? And we articulate it around teaching, targeted academic support, and wider strategies. And that's how we shape it. A reminder that this is a 3-year strategy. So that means your goals around your barriers and your 3-year trend around where you'll set your targets, if it were to be reading, for example, you will have a 3-year ambition, and you're going to review how successful you are towards that ambition at the end of year 1, end of year 2, end of year 3. But your activity will likely mature year by year and build progressively year by year. So you might be really embedding phonics in year 1 and looking at struggling readers with phonic interventions in Key Stage 2 and building oracy as your curriculum in year 1. And then by year 2, you're unpicking that actually when we look at oracy, we'll really need to deepen vocabulary, and we're looking at comprehension. And you're going to do those sequential steps of activity that build over time. And that will also include maintaining the previous year's development, really refining or addressing a change in staffing as well. So we're just going to highlight that maybe put your 3 years worth of last 3 years worth of activity section of your strategy document side by side and see to what extent has your sequence of activity matured and built over time to build a picture of a really refined strategy. Or are we repeating the things year after year? Because if we're doing the same things but expecting different outcomes, that might be something we need to consider for ourselves. Just from our own lived experience of this part of the document. So that tiered approach does align with the EEF guide to Pupil Premium around this tiered approach of high quality teaching, targeted academic support and wider strategies. We would say be cautious about the representation of 50, 25, 25%. That does not mean spend your money 50%, 25, 25. It is a better representation of the levers around that where the evidence tells us are the best bets, which are the biggest levers for affecting a change. Because actually, a lot of the high quality teaching level in terms of professional development and pedagogy is often low cost on the teaching learning toolkit. Metacognition comes at a low cost, feedback comes at a low cost. And so don't assume that that graphic represents spend, it represents the evidence-based strongest guides towards the biggest levers. And that's something to consider. So, and then it references in the lovely PP strategy document about coming back to some of the big evidence-based points around teaching learning toolkit, early years toolkit for our early years colleagues, guidance report, and what was the school improvement planning suite. So there's a wealth out there to consider. And so our second question to our panel is, how do you approach this question of using evidence in your setting? What are the opportunities for you, but also what are the potential challenges? Rachel, I hope you don't mind, I'd love to come to you first, and particularly appreciate you've got a large staff. What does that look like for you?
So this is an interesting one. So again, I think one of the key things is taking the time to, once you've identified the challenge, to really unpick and look at what the solutions are. So if I just pick, when we did phonics, we took a long while, but I think with a big staff, it's around, sometimes we've done various things where we might trial it in one year group first, the approach, or with a class and not class, and then that allows staff to find what's worked. And we find, again, with a large staff, being able to show where it's worked and where people can say, oh, I thought it wouldn't work, but this has really helped. I think often as well with the big stuff, how we've approached this using the evidence is it's getting that belief and that mindset right first, that this is going to work. So we often start by looking at some of the statistics in the research first and share that with the staff to get them on board, and almost start with, well, our whole aim is that every child, regardless of their background or regardless of their starting point, achieves really well in school. And once you bring everyone back to that, no one can almost argue with that. I think that helps with the research. And I think the other thing that we've created is that it's so true, isn't it, that it's quality first teaching that works. So therefore, the vast majority of our time is spent on that. So where we try and change something using the evidence. So for example, when we started changing how we approached guided reading, it was very much allowing every week lots of little opportunities of 20 minutes where either people were just working on one bit to change and people were observing each other and giving feedback. And it was very, very small steps within the bigger picture of how we were changing guided reading. And the other thing we've done to approach it, to give time, because I think that's the biggest reason that sometimes, even with the best will in the world and with the best evidence in the world, things don't change and become habitual and maintained, is time. So what we've created is that staff always have 40 minutes every week to work with, or to have training on working with those disadvantaged children or those children who aren't where they are. So again, I think sometimes it's important when you don't have many to think it can be something you're disadvantaged, but it can also be others that aren't achieving. And they actually work with those children on whatever it is we want to change, because when you're going through the change, staff need longer to do it. And I think that's the key thing. So we create that additional time and thinking space so they can really work on it collaboratively together, share the successes, the highs and the lows. And that's how I'd say we approach it. And we've done it cheaply in the sense that we get our teaching assistants, our learning support assistants, they register the children, and then we have an assembly where they all come, and again it's very planned assembly, so they're learning more, and then that gives us 40 minutes where we can work, the teachers can work with the children, and we feel that's a really good use of time for not a lot of cost.
Yeah, what I'm hearing there is one, really loud and clear that you're really fully embracing that idea that change is a social process. How do we engage and unite our staff by getting them on board, getting them trialing, getting them into the belief and having those values at an anchor point, but also then the systems and structures. How do we reappropriate our systems and structures to and redirect what we've got in the system to make more with it? Some really valuable insights for colleagues. Thank you so much. And I think it would be nice to go to Kerry next. Kerry, would you like to add to Rachel's notes?
Yeah, and as I think it's for us as specialists, because we've had lots of discussion, it's interesting you mentioned like the 50, 25, 25, because a lot of it looks like you should be spending 50% of your money on that and 25 and 25. So I have a lot of discussion with our schools around that, because although we really know the importance of that quality first teaching, for a lot of ours to even access quality first teaching, there's a lot of barriers to remove. So actually significant amount of our input is actually into wider strategies. So we've got Thrive approach, which looks at people's emotional, social development we use across the trust. We have therapeutic support that we buy in. So we buy in our own support for SALT and OT, which again is getting the children ready to learn and removing those barriers so they can actually access quality first teaching. We've sort of invested in Team Teach as a proactive behaviour management strategy. So trauma-informed practice and nurture provision are really embedded in sort of across our academies. So all of those things, that we're able to provide for our pupils through the funding for Pupil Premium, so they can actually get to the point where they're able to access that quality first teaching, is actually a real focus for some of our schools.
Yeah, and I think that concept of settling to learn, to be ready to learn from an inclusion agenda is a huge driver, because if they're not in the classroom and not in the place for learning, then they're not going to engage with it. Exactly your point.
Yeah, and it's not just sort of, we're hitting sort of the majority of our pupils through that. So again, it's not just our Pupil Premium pupils, the majority of our pupils are benefiting from that. And it's that mindset, actually, yes, this will benefit our Pupil Premiums, but there's lots of other children that are going to benefit from that as well. And it's looking at it holistically, and again, long-term embedding of systems and evidence-based approaches like Thrive that are really going to have an impact in a long term, and building that capacity over time. So starting with whole scale implementation, working towards then sort of more targeted intervention work within those as well. So it's really then honing it in and making it more specific to meet more individual need after you've got the whole school ethos and embedding that as a whole school.
Biggest levers that allow you then to be really precision focused for those schools who need that for those pupils that need that additionality that's really bespoke to them. Thank you very much. Michelle, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think for myself and my school, it's all around that kind of utilisation and culture of evidence and research as a core kind of basis for CPD as a school. And actually, if we can generate that culture with our schools and our staff, that's really important, because they are then able to buy into exactly what it is that we are trying to implement. So we have had quite a long journey with that with our staff. And it is something, because staff can see, we present them with the why, the evidence base, and then because they can see the impact of, initiatives that we've rolled out over time, actually they have got that buy-in then. So I think what we try and do in terms of those approaches with our PP strategy is really closely knit everything together with our SDP, and actually then have some of those things as CPD threads as well. So at all times, all staff are aware of what those priorities are, what the research says, and actually how we're going to try and embed that in practice. So then at all kind of levels, staff are knitted into that implementation phase. So thinking around that kind of engage, unite and reflect, our staff are on that journey with us in order to try and do that successfully. So we're doing all those things all the time as a team. If I think of kind of one of our, we've had Tammy, you talked about how things have evolved over time. So reading has been one of our priorities over time and how that's kind of changed. But all the time, staff can see how that has evolved and kind of reflected over time as well. So I feel that that implementation phase, staff knowing that it's not kind of a 6-week implementation, it's a sustained implementation over time has been really key. And through that, we've generated that kind of real culture of evidence and research. Equally ensuring that we're utilising things, so like the EF project evaluations and those types of things as well before we kind of implement some of those activities, looking at what the research tells us. Is that going to work in our context? Is it not? Why not? Before we then hedge our bets on actually what we're going to use first. But like to mention, kind of rolling that out through small pilots before we then upscale those to the wider school as well.
So for colleagues who've not yet gone on to the part of it, because let's face it, you could get lost in the guidance reports and be very happy in that land, let alone stumble across the early years store of rich videos and resources. Where would you find the projects, the evaluation projects, and how have you utilised them? On what are they, for example?
So essentially, yeah, if you're on the kind of EF website, it's kind of on there around different projects that have been funded through the EF. And you can kind of go on there and search for different projects that have already been kind of rolled out in different schools and see what the impact of those projects are. Some of them are quite small scale. Obviously, that will tell you, and you can use that with caution potentially, or some of them are much wider as well. But it's just a really great kind of starting point and can direct you into the right place if that is something that is right for you. Before you start on a whole kind of like SDP priority around something that might not actually work in practice as well. But again, it's really digestible. So if you're kind of really digesting guidance reports, etc., then the project evaluations are another great place to kind of turn to.
Lovely resource to model. I remember working with a school that we were looking at project evaluations, and I know they do use accelerated reader, and we're reading that, and accelerated reader said this is really, really good if you have pupils who can read and can decode the words, but need to really develop on their reading comprehension. But this will not work if they don't have the reading underpinnings. And the school just sat there and went, oh my God, now we know why this is not working, because we've misdiagnosed it. So to know common pitfalls for things we're about to implement, to forewarn us and forearm us, what a powerful tool. So thank you for sharing that. What really struck me in all of your threads and themes was about the rationale between my role as a leader, but also how I'm taking my team along that journey, how we as a school together are going along a journey, very much engaging, uniting and driving change, creating the time and the space to make it sustainable and maintained over time. Some really powerful messages for colleagues. So thank you. With that, we should now be in a position, if we've diagnosed, identified challenges, thought about what we want to accomplish and achieve, and we filled in the activities, and we just maybe quickly do a quick evaluation of what happened last year and how on track we are. My gut, the kind of autistic part of me is like, do the last part first, and then because you want to work out what was your success of the last one to help you guide and build your strategy for the next year. So let's just flip that. So we've done the evaluation. We've now re-articulated our vision for the next year, for this next academic year. We've popped it on our website and we feel very, very accomplished. And let's face it, that is a job well done. It's a very nice tick on the to-do list. And we all like a tick on the to-do list. But what's next for you as PP leads? Once we've got the DFE box ticked, I'm going to come to Michelle first. You were smiling there. Was it the potential for just getting it done by the 31st of December that was making you happy?
Absolutely. Yeah, New Year's Eve deadline always comes around very quickly, doesn't it? So yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's great to obviously have that, like you said, Tammy, that strategy completed, but actually the strategy, unless it's brought to life, is just a piece of paper. So actually, as PP leaders, that is part of our role, is to say, actually, what does that look like enacted in our schools day in, day out? So it doesn't just sit as a piece of paper or strategy that we've written as PP leads. Actually, it needs to be a document that all of our staff have contributed to and that all of our staff are aware of. So as part of that kind of next step, and kind of even prior to that as well, just ensuring that that is enacted in principle. And I find that kind of one of my jobs in kind of senior leadership team meetings is ensuring that actually we come back to this regularly, as part of when we're talking about our priorities as a school, actually really trying to tie this in all of the time and keeping this really buoyant as a leadership team, but also amongst staff as well. So I think that's, you know, part of our responsibility as PP leads to make sure that everybody is aware of that and that they are trying to promote these changes. So again, going back to that implementation, I suppose that this PP strategy is just the very, very start. What does that look like in terms of those milestones when we're implementing those things? And of course, we're monitoring, which is really, really key to ensure that those aspects are being successful. And actually, if something's not working, then why is it not? Do we need to have a change in direction? Or actually, do we need to do something completely new? What is that rationale behind why something might not have been working? So I think just kind of continuing to support with that ongoing impact and evaluation is really important, and something that I've learned, rather than getting to the December deadline and then thinking, oh no, I need to kind of evaluate last year, and then it becomes a really huge job actually evaluating as an ongoing cycle. Makes our lives a lot easier, but also makes everything a lot more purposeful as well in terms of the strategy.
Which is why I think the kind of the where they've excluded the last two and said it's monitor, but then before evaluate is really, really helpful articulation to really tease apart those two stages of the implementation. And it was really nice to hear you talk about the kind of that enacting. I was delivering a course once and somebody said, we need to make sure it's lived, not just laminated. And I was like, oh my God, because how many times do we laminate a behaviour approach or a this or a that, and we pop it on our wall and we feel very satisfied, but we want to make sure it's lived, not laminated. So thank you, Michelle. I'm going to come to Rachel next. You were nodding there with Michelle. There's a lot of echoing of reading.
Yeah, I think the other thing I think is important is, I mean, Michelle, you mentioned loads, but the one thing for me as well was celebrating that. I think we are going on evaluating, but I think it's really nice to take stock and just really celebrate with the staff about the achievements. I think, you know, the job is getting harder and harder, and our funds are getting reduced. So I think helping people see the quick wins, because what has really struck me, certainly when we're looking at behaviour and things, is sometimes it is a very long journey. And like you said, Tammy, we're changing things sort of each year slightly, and I think it's helping people. We're not at the final bit necessarily, but along the way, this is where we were and this is where we've come to, and how key that is. And I think Michelle, you mentioned as well before, just making sure it's really clearly aligned with the school development plan, because there's only so many hours in the day, and it's got to be really linked. So helping that really ensuring everyone's clear on that as well.
What struck me there, it's a bit like those, what we do with the pupils, we create those, we chunk it down, we create stepping stones, so that then we can see how we're going to go on that journey to the whole picture. And that's exactly what we're doing for staff. We're breaking it down into the stepping stones so we can really, really highlight successes. That was really lovely. Thank you very much. And Kerry, what was your reflections to this very important question?
As Pupil Premium lead, you're almost like the project manager for it, because you can't do it all on your own. You're almost managing lots of little different projects that your staff team are leading on and implementing, and it's keeping touching base with those people, giving them the check-ins, giving them that support and advice and their chance to talk through any difficulties they're having, because you're managing that, but you're not leading on that, all of that. So you're relying on your staff to do that. But I think you need to be that point of contact where they can come and say and have those conversations and those reflectiveness as they go through. And it's that not being afraid to change the plan as you go. So if if you're monitoring and you're looking at something and it's not having the impact you want it to have, there's no point running it all year and getting to the end of the year and going, oh well, that was rubbish, wasn't it? So if you get to your first monitoring and it's not going well, it's not being brave enough to change the plan and do what's right as you go.
Yeah, because it's like there's feedback loop. You don't teach something and wait to get to the exam at the end of the year and wonder, did you get there? You need that learning feedback loop. And I think that monitoring loop gives us that chance to either highlight, like you said, Rachel, let's celebrate. This is working well. why is this working well? It's because we worked in these ways and we approached this in our implementation like this, and this is a team how we can effectively make change happen. And sometimes pointing out how we were successful allows us to replicate it, allows us to be metacognitive in our own implementation approach. But equally, as Kerry was pointing out, it invites us to think, well, do we need an adaptation? Do we need to think about where a tweak is needed to make this more fit for purpose, fit for context, as Michelle was talking about with the promising projects. Some real high ticket items there for us to think about across our context. And I love Michelle, I love Kerry, you were talking then about a range of types, whether it be a behaviour strategy or a teaching and learning strategy, that we're diligent with that monitoring.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really important because we need to see those small steps of progress, don't we? And that's, as like Rachel said, that's what gives you the reward and keeps people moving and keeps people engaged in the project when they see the benefits of it.
Yeah, we know what success looks like. Isn't that exciting? I mean, the kids love it. We're just adult learners as well. Excellent. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And then we're going to come into our last space now, which you have already touched upon. So I'm a little bit worried that I've already depleted your library wealth of resources. But it's very much about this idea that implementation is not just about managing change. It's about leading people and leading our colleagues in a complex sequence of work. And therefore, change implementation and managing change is a collaborative and social process driven by how people think, behave, and interact. And that's exactly why then in the new iteration of the implementation guidance report, recommendation one talks about adopting the behaviours that drive effective implementation, whether it be engaging people so they can shape what happens. And I think we've heard some really nice examples of what that looks like already. Uniting them behind what's being implemented, getting them on board, getting them bought in to the project, about why it matters, the big why we heard that, and then reflect, monitor, and adapt to improve implementation. So this is our last question. So it will just invite colleagues to share what one tip would you pass on from your own experience around uniting and engaging colleagues around your plan? Or is it yours, shall I say, as a school, not yours as an individual? Because we know you are not the only guardian of the Pupil Premium strategy, it's everyone's strategy. So I feel like I need a capital Y there rather than a small case Y. Rachel, how about for you? What's your one tip you would like to pass on to colleagues?
I think it's that you just can't celebrate enough, and it's those personal little interactions that you're doing something, to say that you've spotted in that class or that child, the difference that you've noticed maybe in another context, I think is really, really important. And sometimes I just share this one, it's the little things, and it's just spotting the odd one that's different as a barrier. So you were saying those barriers to learning. We had one child quite bright, but really behind with his reading, couldn't understand it. By year 2, he's starting to have different behaviors because he was struggling, and obviously knew he was struggling. And then we just suddenly, that conversation around the words are jumbling. We went and family sort of spoke to mum and said, look, he'd been to the opticians lots of times, but we're realizing, she's like, well, he can't say what the differences are. So we the one teacher that worked with him worked on what's different, what's better, what's not, so he could really articulate it when he went. He's now got coloured glasses, and the difference within a week has been phenomenal. So I think sometimes it's not forgetting we have whole grand structures, but for that one child, the difference is huge. So I think it's celebrating lots, and don't forget the odd individual, that individually you can make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, and I think it comes back when we speak to Jonathan Sharples about implementation. The really annoying fact about effective implementation, lots of small things done well. Because you know what? If it was a silver bullet, one shot easy night, then we'd all be doing it. We'd already be doing it. We wouldn't be talking about it. It would just happen. And I think you've really articulated lots of small things done well, and with deliberate intention. Really powerful. and coming back to celebrating as well. Thank you so much. Kerry, what's your thoughts?
Mine's always like creating that shared vision that you can't do it on your own. And I think sort of I've learned from experience with that, thinking like, oh, Pupil Premium's my responsibility, so it's my job, but you can't do it on your own. And it's about really communicating with your colleagues and involving your colleagues at every level of that.
Unfortunately, we'd like to be able to take all of the children in school all of the time as an individual, but since that's not possible, it's a shared vision. It has to be a shared ownership. There's also the team impact together will be so much more profound. Thank you, Kerry. And Michelle, would you like to agree with any of our colleagues, or would you like to add your own perspective?
Yeah, I think similarly to what Kerry's just said around kind of that collective responsibility for all staff to know that actually it's all of our missions together to drive this as a school, but also how as PP leads we can distribute that leadership and actually really, I suppose, look through that lens and spot who our potential kind of shiny leads might be, wherever they may be and whatever role they kind of currently sit in. Actually, they might be the person that are really going to be able to drive certain aspects. So being able to spot that in people and going forward with them and saying, you know, I see this potential in you, and asking them to drive different aspects, I feel has really worked really well, because they are your kind of PP champions essentially. So then you know you've got that distributed leadership model across school, driving it day in, day out, and giving those the shout outs, going back to that celebrations and those successes along the way is really helpful. So yeah, that kind of distributed leadership model and collective responsibility, I think for me has been key.
Excellent. There's so many golden nuggets that all of our colleagues have shared there across the 4 questions that we've been exploring together for the last sort of 50 odd minutes. And I think there's a lot of perspectives for us to think about in our own roles, and hopefully a lot for you to take away in that space. I just want to say a big thank you to some of the comments also in our chat, including the lovely Nikki Shaw that talked about a new evaluation, research and resources about understanding attendance, about linking into the PP and SEND at policy level. So really useful. And I think there's what we're hearing, particularly from the minister's recent discussions around attainment to achieve alongside thriving. I think there's a lot of themes that came up in our discussion today about that settling to learn, ready to learn in order to achieve and meet our aspirational goals. So we thrive in our settings in order to achieve. And I think that'll be really interesting, because the attendance and inclusion agenda knit together very, very well for that. So thank you so much, Nikki, for sharing that little nugget in the chat. And for colleagues who are observing this after the fact, it is by the impactedgroup.uk attendance report. So if you want to give that a quick Google, that's there. For those of us in the room, we can very judiciously click on that and get through to a bit of lovely reading. So hopefully now we can retire with a hot mug of cocoa, because we are towards the end of our evening, in the knowledge that we have quite a lot of that beautiful piece of reading to take away. But we also have a range of other threads. This is the term we know you as Pupil Premium leaders and school leaders will be wanting to embrace a range of support materials. So just recommending that you take a little look. We've got some beautiful podcasts that are coming out weekly. This is an example of one of many live webinars we're hosting, including some videos that will be on our on our YouTube video, and some nice blogs that are coming out. So even if you're not local to us to engage with a local training event, you've got some options there around how you can continue to engage. And this is a kind of samples of what's coming ahead in this half term. Obviously this is our webinar today, but we've got one with the lovely John Headley about why adaptive teaching and formative assessment is integral for PP and SEND students. These PP videos are already available about evaluation, which we've talked about, and the disadvantage calculator, and there's a blog about that as well. And we have got a range of podcasts available. So don't hesitate to get in touch. And if you are very new to the role, then we've got the lovely Matt Blurton from the Ralph Sherman Trust has talked about his PP start point and his top tips. So for anyone who's with us, Thank you to our very learned panel for sharing their expertise this evening, and thank you for the colleagues who joined us and who are joining us asynchronously on our webinar on the video recording. It's been an absolute joy to work with everyone today. Thank you, Rachel, Kerry, and Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night for the rest of our colleagues. If you have any questions, I will be pausing now to see if anyone wants to grab me for anything. And a big thank you to Rachel, Kerry, and Michelle. That is now paused, so I'll stop sharing for a second. That's great. Fabulous. Thank you. That seemed to run strangely to time, which was very, very good of you all. You are obviously all very exceptional. Fabulous. Thank you so much. Just some feedback. How did you, from your experience, that's the way that format ran for you?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's really helpful to have all the questions before.
Yeah, definitely to come in prepped makes a difference.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. We've got some lovely quotes. So there's a thank you from Nikki Shaw there, to say thank you. And Lisa from DDAT's been with us to say thank you. And the lovely Amy Hope. Oh, I hope that's warmed your cockles this evening. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thanks for organising it. It's been really
thank
useful.
you, Tammy.
Thank you.
The network. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.